When Elijah Turner inherited the land, he thought it would be empty, a stretch of forgotten dirt, just like the will described. But as his wagon creaked to a stop beside the wind-battered fence, 3 shadows rose in the golden light of dusk, taller, broader, and more alive than anything he'd ever seen. Their eyes held hunger, not just for food, but for something far deeper. And when the tallest of them smiled, her voice rolled across the field like thunder. "We haven't eaten today. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories like this pull you in, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's tale might just make you rethink what it means to inherit more than land, but a legacy that hungers back." Elijah Turner didn't believe in ghosts, but something about the land made his skin crawl long before he ever saw the house. The wagon rattled along the dry path, wheels biting into packed earth. Dust clung to the hem of his coat and the back of his throat, bitter and bone-dry. He had been riding since dawn, the old mule slower than he liked, but reliable. The folded deed sat in his breast pocket, damp with sweat despite the cool air. It was his now, all of it. 60 acres of soil and timber, a creaking farmhouse, and a promise or maybe a curse left behind by the uncle he never met in life. The horizon shimmered as the house came into view. Crooked shingles, paint peeled to bone, chimney leaning like an old man who forgot how to stand straight. It should have been empty. The will had said as much. No livestock, no tenants, no legal complications. The lawyer had promised. Just a clean cut of land for Elijah to start over, sell it, live on it, whatever he wanted. But the porch wasn't empty. 3 women stood in a line, shoulder to shoulder, dresses the color of blood, sky, and harvest wheat. Their shapes rose against the fading sun like monuments tall, wide-shouldered, and still as statues. At first, Elijah thought they were part of the house sculptures maybe, something carved from old wood. But then the one in red moved, tilting her head slowly to the side. The movement sent a ripple through his gut, like watching a boulder breathe. He pulled the mule to a halt. Dust swirled around the wheels, and for a moment, the wind fell completely silent. The woman in red took a step forward. Her hair was curled like firelight, and her voice was low, deliberate. "You must be Elijah." He nodded, hand twitching toward his satchel not because he had a weapon, but because he felt suddenly naked without one. "I wasn't expecting anyone." The woman in blue laughed softly. "No one ever is. You're—" He hesitated. "Are you caretakers?" The one in yellow stepped down from the porch. Each bootfall seemed to land heavier than gravity allowed, like the earth had to catch its breath beneath her weight. "We've been here a long time," she said. The red one followed, then the blue. They moved slowly, deliberately, like they had all the time in the world, and maybe they did. Then, standing only a few feet away, the tallest one leaned in, her shadow falling across Elijah's chest like a veil. Her eyes met his with a hunger that wasn't just for food. "We haven't eaten today," she said softly, and the other 2 smiled. Elijah swallowed hard. He felt the wind return, brushing past him with a warning chill. Inherited land or not, this place wasn't waiting for him. It had simply been waiting. For someone. Elijah had expected isolation. Maybe some dust, some broken windows, maybe even a raccoon in the attic. He hadn't prepared for 3 women built like oaks with smiles that seemed to stretch too wide across their faces. They didn't ask him inside. They simply turned and walked back toward the porch, and something in him, something that should have told him to turn and leave, made him follow. The boards groaned under their weight, louder than they should have. When he stepped up behind them, the sound of his own boots was embarrassingly light, like a boy sneaking into a grown man's life. "We figured you'd be older," the blue-dressed one said, not looking at him. "I figured you wouldn't be here," he shot back. The woman in yellow turned slightly, enough to glance over her shoulder. Then we're both disappointed. There was no malice in it, just fact. The sun was slipping low behind the hills, casting everything in orange. It made the windows glow like fire from within. One of them, the woman in red, leaned against a porch post and tilted her face up to the light like she was drinking it in. "I don't understand," Elijah said. "This place, it was supposed to be empty. No one said anything about—" He stopped himself. He wasn't sure what word to use. "Squatters? Tenants? Giants? You'll understand soon," the blue-dressed woman murmured. He noticed then that they hadn't introduced themselves. No names, no explanations. They didn't ask who he was, where he came from, what he planned to do. It was as if they already knew. The woman in red looked at him again. her eyes a color he couldn't quite place somewhere between rust and garnet. "Do you plan on staying the night?" "I hadn't planned on anything." "That's dangerous," said the one in yellow. "This land doesn't like indecision." Elijah looked out toward the fields. They were wild but oddly orderly, grass tall, but only in certain rows. Almost like someone had been tending to it, not with tools, but with movement, with pacing, with patterns. "Look," he said, trying to summon the version of himself that handled confrontation, the version that could speak clearly when threatened. "This land is mine now. It was passed down to me legally. If you've been here, you'll need to find somewhere else to go." All three women turned to look at him in unison. The silence afterward was immediate and total. The blue-dressed woman stepped forward. "This land doesn't belong to men. It never has. And it's not yours," said the red. "But it wants something from you," added the yellow. Elijah's jaw tightened. "Wants what?" They didn't answer. Instead, the woman in red simply opened the door to the farmhouse, wide enough to reveal a dark hallway beyond, and said, "You'll see in the morning." Then all three stepped inside, leaving him alone on the porch as the last light of the day bled across the sky. The door creaked slowly shut behind them, and the wind picked up again, colder this time. Elijah stood on the porch for longer than he realized. The night had fallen quiet around him, except for the rustle of tall grass swaying in a breeze that didn't seem to touch the house itself. The farmhouse loomed behind him like a second presence, not just a structure, but something watching, waiting. Every board, every shutter, every nail in the frame looked old, but nothing was broken. No decay, no rot, just stillness, as though time passed differently here. Eventually, the cold pressed against his back hard enough to push him forward. He stepped inside. The air inside the house was heavy. Not stale. Exactly, it didn't smell of mold or dust, but of something preserved. Like a room no one had dared disturb for a very long time. A strange mixture of rosewater, firewood, and something faintly metallic clung to the walls. He followed the faint creak of his own footsteps down the hall, past a faded coat rack and an old oil lamp flickering weakly. Then he saw the dining room. A massive wooden table stretched the length of the space, longer than any room in a house this size had a right to contain. The floor beneath it was darker, worn smooth by years of feet circling it. At the table sat 4 large chairs, each carved from a single tree trunk. 3 of them were tucked in just slightly, as if their occupants had risen only minutes ago. The 4th sat pushed far back from the table, its cushion untouched, dustless, and the table itself was set. Plates gleamed in the low lamplight. Cutlery rested precisely on embroidered cloth. Bowls sat empty but spotless, like they'd been waiting patiently for someone to finally fill them. Candles unlit marked the center, their wax untouched. Elijah leaned closer to one plate and saw something etched along the rim. E.T., his own initials. He took a slow step back. "You see it now," said the voice behind him. He spun around. The woman in blue stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely over her chest, her hair braided over one shoulder like a thick rope. She didn't move further into the room. "Why is the table set?" Elijah asked, keeping his voice low, as if loud words might shatter whatever strange atmosphere lingered here. "Because we were promised a 4th. He swallowed. "By who?" "Your uncle," she said. "Before he stopped coming. Before he starved the land." She looked at the table as though remembering something far away, or perhaps reliving something close. Elijah tried to shake the chill crawling up his back. "You talk about this place like it's alive." She didn't answer that. Instead, she stepped aside, motioning to a hallway deeper into the house. "You should sleep," she said. "The land doesn't like tired men, and you'll need your strength." "For what?" Her lips curved upward into something not quite a smile. "For breakfast." The room they gave him was larger than he expected, and quieter than any place he'd ever slept. No creaking floors, no distant coyote howls, not even the gentle tick of a clock. Just the hush of the house around him, breathing in slow rhythm. He lay on the bed, stiff as the mattress beneath him, staring at the ceiling. Moonlight filtered through the window, pale and thin. The kind of light that made everything appear bleached and unfamiliar. He hadn't seen the women again after the blue-dressed one led him upstairs. No offer of food, no discussion of where things stood. Just silence, like they were giving him time to catch up to something they already knew. Sleep didn't come easily. He drifted in and out of half-dreams faces with 2 wide smiles, heavy footsteps circling the house, and voices whispering in tones he couldn't understand. By morning, He didn't feel rested. He felt watched. The sun had barely crested the hills when he stepped downstairs. The dining room was empty now. The table cleared. The chairs still pushed back in their same arrangement. No signs of life. Just that damn fourth seat, waiting. He turned away and spotted a door he hadn't noticed before. Smaller than the others. Not quite hidden, just uninviting. Still, something pulled him toward it. A gut-level instinct, like the kind you don't question when walking through dark woods and sensing something just out of sight. The door opened with a groan, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. The air grew cooler with every step. He half expected cobwebs and mold. But the basement was immaculate, lined with shelves, crates, and an old desk tucked into the corner, its surface covered in papers. And on the wall above the desk, framed behind glass, hung a photograph. His uncle stood in the middle of the frame, smiling in a way Elijah had never seen. Not a polite grin, but something softer, more satisfied. And beside him, the three women. The same women. Younger, maybe. Or perhaps the lighting just made them seem so. Still tall, still impossibly large, but not monstrous. In the photo, they looked like a family. Elijah stepped closer. A letter lay beneath the frame, brittle with age. His uncle's handwriting scrawled across the yellowing paper. To whoever finds this, the land must be kept warm. The hunger must be met. The women are not to be feared. They are to be honored. And if you've inherited this place, you are the next to understand why I stayed. There was no signature, just a date. 5 years ago, Elijah. He turned sharply. The red-dressed woman stood at the top of the stairs now, looking down at him with a calm that wasn't quite serene. She didn't blink. You weren't supposed to find that yet. He swallowed, folding the letter without meaning to. Why not? Because you haven't made your choice. What choice? She tilted her head, just like she had on the porch that first day. To feed the land, she said, or feed us. Elijah followed her out of the basement, the letter still folded tightly in his hand. She said nothing more, and he didn't ask. They walked in silence through the house and out into the morning light. The air thick with dew and something else, something heavier. The land looked different in daylight. Less wild, more deliberate. Rows of dirt curved like ribs across the open field. Grass swayed where it had no reason to grow. Patches of color dotted the soil, flowers too orderly to be random. He realized with growing unease that the land wasn't neglected. It had been cared for, just not by human hands in the usual sense. The red-dressed woman, he still didn't know her name, led him down a trail that twisted past a dry well and into a sloped clearing. The soil here was darker, richer, earth that had seen things, earth that had tasted things. This is where your uncle began, she said softly. Elijah glanced at her. Began what? Feeding the land. She crouched down, running one massive hand through the dirt. It sifted like black sugar between her fingers. It doesn't like to be empty. It doesn't like to be forgotten. He stared out over the land, feeling the silence again. That strange, thick kind of quiet that doesn't just mean a lack of sound, it means something is listening. What did he give it? Elijah asked, voice tight. She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd arrived, her eyes softened. Everything, she said. He wanted to scoff, to laugh it off. But the way the trees bent ever so slightly inward, the way the wind moved like breath, made something old stir inside his chest, something that recognized this place before he did. You think I owe this land something, he said slowly. We know you do, she said. It's not about debt. It's about balance. And what happens if I don't? He asked. Behind them, the other two women had appeared, one on the path, the other near the edge of the trees. He hadn't heard them arrive. They flanked the field now, as if completing a circle around him. The blue-dressed one spoke next. Then the land begins to starve. And when the land starves, said the yellow, we starve. Elijah's heart pounded. I didn't ask for this. No one ever does, the red said. But some inherit more than land. He stepped back, the letter crinkling in his fist. You're talking like this place is alive. It is. The earth beneath his boots felt softer suddenly, as though it were listening, as though it remembered. What did you mean? Elijah asked. When you said he gave you everything? The three women looked at one another. A long moment passed. Not his body, the red said. That would have been simple. The yellow one stepped forward. He gave his care, his attention, his presence, his warmth. The blue added, voice quieter now. That's what this land eats. Not meat, not bones. Men, not the flesh. The man, and Elijah realized this wasn't about dying. It was about staying. Elijah didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, the stars thick above the horizon like spilled sugar across black velvet. The wind had died down, but the trees still whispered. Not loudly, not with malice, but with the low murmur of something ancient remembering his name. Inside, the women moved without sound. Once or twice he heard footsteps in the hallway, the faint creak of wood near his door. They didn't speak to him. They didn't need to. Something had shifted. They had given him the story or enough of it, and now they were waiting for his choice. But it wasn't a choice between leaving or staying anymore. It was a choice between feeding something or letting it die. He didn't know when he finally dozed off, but morning arrived with the heavy smell of baking bread and lavender in the air. He stepped into the kitchen barefoot, and there they were, all three of them seated at the long wooden table. This time the fourth seat had been pulled out. The red-dressed woman gestured toward it. "You'll eat with us this time." He sat down slowly, unsure if the food would even taste right in his mouth. On the table, cornbread, eggs, roots he didn't recognize but which smelled like earth and smoke. The women didn't touch their plates. They just watched him. And as he took his first bite, something loosened in the room. A tightness released. It was like air returning to a space that hadn't been opened in years. The yellow-dressed one leaned forward. "The land remembers warmth, Elijah. It remembers when someone cares for it, when someone feeds it. That's all it's asking for. That's all we're asking for." He looked between them, studying their faces for the first time without fear. Their features were larger than life, their hands thick and calloused, their shoulders broad, their necks strong like the trunks of old trees. And yet, there was something delicate about them, a weariness behind their eyes that had nothing to do with physical strength. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "Longer than your uncle," said the blue one. "Longer than the house. Long enough to forget our last names," the yellow one added. "But not long enough to forget what it feels like to be hungry," said the red. He swallowed, the food turning heavy in his stomach. "Is that what I am to you?" he asked. "A meal?" The red woman's expression softened. "Not a meal, Elijah. A memory. A heartbeat. The land doesn't eat flesh, it eats presence. It needs someone who listens. Someone who roots themselves here. And if I stay, then we share the hunger," she said. "And in doing so, we satisfy it." He looked down at his plate. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear anymore, from the pressure of what was being asked. And yet, as he sat among them, something unfamiliar stirred inside him. Not dread, but belonging. By midday, the sky had turned the color of slate, and the wind carried the scent of rain, that coppery, electric warning of a storm that hadn't arrived yet but was already making the ground nervous. Elijah walked the perimeter of the land, alone for the first time since arriving. The sisters had vanished somewhere into the fields without a word, leaving him space not to decide, but to feel. And that's what the land demanded. Not logic, not signatures, not deals inked on paper. It wanted feeling. He stopped at the edge of a low ridge and stared down at the valley. It wasn't much tangled grass, thick soil, and a stream that barely remembered how to flow. But beneath it all was a heartbeat. He could feel it now, like a low vibration in his soles, like the earth waiting to be held. The words from the letter pulsed in his mind. The land must be kept warm. His uncle hadn't left him a farm. He'd left him a contract. One older than law. One rooted in something deeper than ownership. Back at the house, the sisters were waiting when he returned. They stood in the doorway together, blocking the frame. Not menacing, just still, unmoving, like gates that only opened when you proved yourself worthy of crossing. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He stepped forward, took off his coat, and hung it on the post beside the door. A signal, a gesture, an agreement. "You've decided," the red one said. "I've accepted," he replied. "I don't know everything, and maybe I never will, but I know this place needs more than hands. It needs a heart." The blue-dressed woman reached into the folds of her skirt and pulled out a book. Thin, leather-bound, older than it looked. She handed it to him. "What is it?" Elijah asked. "You're part of the pact," she said. "You write in it, each day. You speak to the land through it. Tell it your thoughts, your regrets, your work, your joy. That's how we keep it fed. Words, words with weight," said the yellow. "The kind spoken from a place of truth. That's the nourishment." He ran his hand over the cover. There were grooves in the leather, deep from years of use. His uncle's hand, he realized, The red woman stepped aside, allowing him through the door. "Then come in, Elijah Turner. From this day forward, this land will remember you too." And just like that, he crossed the threshold, not just into the house but into the pact. That night, they sat at the table again, all four of them. The food was warm, the laughter light, and the chairs didn't creak the way they had before. They didn't carry the weight of strangers anymore. They carried a family. Weeks passed like wind over tall grass, quiet, constant, and just strange enough to make Elijah wonder if time moved differently on this land. He rose with the Sunday. He tilled the soil by hand, not because there weren't tools, but because it felt right. The land responded to sweat more than metal. He wrote in the book every night, not as a ritual but as instinct, like the land needed to hear his voice just as much as it needed his footsteps. The sisters worked too, tirelessly. He never saw them sleep. One would be in the fields before dawn, another baking or cutting roots in the kitchen. The third, usually the blue-dressed one, could be found standing at the edge of the woods, her eyes fixed on the horizon like she was watching for something none of them had named yet. They moved like seasons, quiet, dependable, occasionally fierce. And then, one evening, as the light slanted hard across the fields and painted the house in amber, the red-dressed woman sat across from him at the table and placed an envelope down between them. Elijah didn't move to touch it. "What is this?" he asked. "Your uncle's blood," she said. "What's left of it?" He frowned. "That's not possible. He died in town. I saw the death certificate. There was not literal blood," she said, with the faintest smile. "His word, his promise, the contract that bound him here. And now you." He opened the envelope slowly, expecting something ominous, but inside was a single sheet, yellowed and soft. It wasn't legal. It wasn't notarized. It was handwritten. A recipe. Bread. He looked up. "He baked?" "He learned," the blue-dressed woman said, appearing from the hall. "You'll have to too." The yellow one entered last, wiping her hands on her apron. "The land doesn't just want labor, Elijah. It wants creation. Care. Something made by hand, given with intention. That's the bread of the pact." Elijah read the recipe again. Simple enough: flour, water, salt, heat. But written in the margins were notes, scattered thoughts, memories of days spent here. He realized, suddenly, that this wasn't just a meal. It was memory turned into matter. "Tomorrow," the red one said, rising, "at dawn, you bake, you break bread, and the land will decide if it accepts you for good." He sat alone long after they left the room, the note still in hand. He could feel it now, not just the responsibility, but the intimacy of what he'd stepped into. It wasn't about survival. It wasn't about feeding mouths or sowing fields. It was about offering yourself piece by piece, loaf by loaf, until the land no longer felt empty. And in return, you were never hungry again. He was awake before the sky turned gold. The kitchen was colder than usual. Not unfriendly, just quiet, like the house itself was holding its breath. Elijah moved with purpose, rolling up his sleeves, grinding the coarse salt, measuring out flour with the same care he might give to laying stone for a grave or building the walls of a chapel. This wasn't food. This was an offering. He followed his uncle's handwritten recipe down to the breath between instructions. He kneaded until his arms ached, folded until the dough felt alive beneath his palms. There was a rhythm to it, like the heartbeat he once felt beneath his feet in the field. It echoed now in the table, in his chest. The oven was an old cast-iron belly of a thing, already warm when he opened it. He hadn't lit it. He didn't ask how. As the loaf baked, the scent filled the house, not just yeast and warmth, but something older, like dirt after rain, like cedar split fresh, like memory rising into air. The sisters entered without a word. Each of them stood in a corner of the room, not looming, but present. Their eyes followed the scent. Their breathing synced with his. The blue one held a knife. The yellow one held a wooden plate. The red-dressed woman stood empty-handed, the only one who would not take, but who would see. When the bread was ready, Elijah took it out with shaking hands. He placed it on the plate. Steam curled upward like a spirit freed. He didn't ask what happened next. He simply nodded. The knife sliced through the crust with a whisper. The blue-dressed woman handed the first piece to Elijah. "You eat first," she said. He took the bite slowly, letting the warmth soak into his tongue, his throat, his stomach. It filled him, not just with food, but with place, with belonging. Then the sisters each took a piece. They didn't eat like people who were starving. They ate like people who had waited years to share something sacred. And when the last crumb was gone, and the plate empty, and the knife cleaned and placed back on the table, the land sighed. It was a sound deeper than thunder, quieter than wind. It came through the walls, through the floor, through his feet. A settling, a shift, acceptance. The red-dressed woman moved toward him, placing one hand on his shoulder. Her touch was heavy, grounding. Not possession, not gratitude, something else. "Now," she said, voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "You are of the land." The blue one kissed his temple. The yellow took his hand. And Elijah Turner, son of nobody, heir to nothing but dust, realized this wasn't the end of a ritual. It was the beginning of a life. The fields bloomed by mid-autumn, thick with wheat, heavy with squash, veins of wild strawberries curling along the edges of the property like red-tipped threads stitched into a quilt. The land had changed. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe Elijah had. He moved with purpose now, not like someone managing property, but like someone tending to a living thing. He knew where the ground dipped before it did. He knew which tree groaned when the wind turned. He could feel the soil's mood in his knees before the rain ever came. The sisters remained unchanged in body, but their presence felt lighter. Not smaller, never that, but less burdened. The red-dressed one laughed more now, often at nothing. The yellow had taken to humming when she walked the perimeter of the house. The blue still stood at the edge of the woods most mornings, but now, she smiled when he joined her. The journal, the one they gave him when he accepted the pact, was already half full. Pages of thoughts, days of silence recorded in ink, long stretches of notes about weather, about aching shoulders, about dreams he hadn't known he had. In town, people began to whisper. Someone had seen Elijah at the supply post and said he looked bigger. Someone else claimed they saw 4 shadows behind him as he passed by a window, though he was walking alone. One traveler asked if the Turners' old land was cursed. Another said it had finally been blessed. It didn't matter. The land remembered what it wanted, and it remembered Elijah. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields in syrup-colored gold, he stood on the porch with the sisters beside him. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Below, near the foot of the hill where the soil was darkest, a single stone marker had been placed. No name, just a carving, a braid of wheat, and 3 interwoven rings. His uncle's resting place. Or maybe just a symbol. A promise. The red-dressed woman leaned her head against Elijah's shoulder. "It's full now," she said. "What is?" "The land, the silence, the hunger." He looked out over the fields, the hills, the creek that now flowed steady through the far pasture. "It won't ask for more," he said. "Not yet," said the yellow. "Not until it forgets again." "But that won't happen," the blue added, resting her hand on his. "Because you'll remind it." And he would. Each day he stayed. Each time he wrote. Each loaf he baked. Each word he spoke. Each look exchanged with the 3 women who had waited so long for someone to listen. To give not what he had, but who he was. Elijah Turner no longer owned the land. He belonged to it. And the land, finally, fully, remembered him.